A book that refuses to be read. Yes, that's right. It's 1912. A Lithuanian book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich discovers a mysterious manuscript in an Italian villa. The moment he opens it, he knows he's found something extraordinary. The pages are filled with text in an unknown script. Characters that look almost familiar, but follow no recognizable pattern. Words that seem to have structure, but resist all attempts at translation. But it's not just the text. The manuscript is filled with illustrations that defy explanation. Plants that look botanical but match no known species. Astronomical diagrams that seem scientific but follow no earthly system. Naked women bathing in green pools connected by pipes that could be plumbing or could be magic. For over a century, the world's greatest codebreakers have tried to crack its secrets. Military cryptographers who broke enemy codes during 2 world wars. Computer scientists who developed the algorithms that power modern encryption. Artificial intelligence systems that can translate ancient languages and decode complex patterns. All have failed. The Voynich manuscript remains as mysterious today as it was when Voynich first discovered it. Some say it's an elaborate hoax, a medieval con game designed to fool wealthy collectors. Others believe it contains lost alchemical secrets or encrypted medical knowledge. A few think it might not be human at all. But one fact is undeniable. This 240-page manuscript, written on medieval vellum with authentic period inks, has stumped every attempt at decipherment. It's a book that seems designed to be unreadable, a puzzle that grows more complex the closer you examine it. Tonight, we dive deep into the mystery of the Voynich manuscript, the medieval book that has defeated modern computers, the encrypted text that might be the most sophisticated code ever created, the impossible document that proves there are still secrets the past refuses to give up. This is the story of humanity's most mysterious book, and the maddening quest to understand what it's trying to tell us. Wilfrid Michael Voynich was no ordinary book dealer. Born in Lithuania when it was part of the Russian Empire, he had been a revolutionary, a political prisoner, and in exile before becoming one of the world's most successful dealers in rare manuscripts. By 1912, Voynich had established himself in London as a man who could find books that others couldn't. Wealthy collectors and prestigious libraries relied on his network of contacts across Europe to locate rare texts and ancient manuscripts. His specialty was finding treasures hidden in private collections, manuscripts that had been forgotten in monastery libraries or estate houses, books that their owners didn't realize were valuable, texts that had survived wars and revolutions by sheer accident. In the summer of 1912, Voynich traveled to Italy to examine a collection of manuscripts held by the Jesuit college at the Villa Mondragone, near Rome. The Jesuits needed money to maintain their institution, and they were quietly selling some of their rarer books to private collectors. Among the manuscripts was one that immediately caught Voynich's attention. It was bound in worn vellum and written in an unknown script. The illustrations were unlike anything he had seen before. Strange plants, astronomical diagrams, bizarre scenes of naked women in what looked like elaborate bathing systems. Voynich was an expert in medieval manuscripts. He could recognize Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and most European scripts from the medieval period. But this text was different. The characters looked almost familiar, but they didn't match any known writing system. More intriguing still, the manuscript showed clear signs of authentic medieval construction. The vellum was genuine parchment made from animal skin. The inks had the chemical composition of medieval pigments. The binding and sewing matched techniques used in the 15th century. This wasn't a modern forgery. Whatever the manuscript contained, it had been created during the medieval period using authentic materials and techniques. Voynich negotiated to purchase the manuscript along with several other texts from the Jesuit collection. He brought it back to London and began showing it to scholars and cryptographers, hoping someone could identify the script or decipher the text. The initial reactions were mixed. Some scholars dismissed it as meaningless scribbles or an elaborate hoax. Others were intrigued by the apparent complexity of the script and the sophistication of the illustrations. But as more experts examined the manuscript, a consensus began to emerge. Whatever this was, it wasn't random scribbling. The text showed clear patterns and structures that suggested an underlying language or code. The illustrations, while bizarre, were executed with skill and appeared to follow consistent symbolic systems. The manuscript was assigned a catalog number based on Voynich's name, MS-408, but it quickly became known as the Voynich manuscript. Within a few years, it had gained a reputation as one of the world's most mysterious books. Voynich himself was convinced that the manuscript contained important lost knowledge, perhaps alchemical formulas, maybe medical recipes, possibly encrypted correspondence between medieval scholars. He spent years trying to find someone who could crack the code. He consulted with cryptographers, linguists, historians, and anyone else who might have insights into the manuscript's origins or meaning. But the text remained stubbornly unreadable. Every attempted decipherment failed. Every proposed solution fell apart under closer examination. As word of the manuscript spread, it began attracting attention from beyond the academic world. Wealthy collectors offered enormous sums to purchase it. Government cryptographers requested permission to study it. Occultists claimed it contained mystical secrets. But Voynich held onto the manuscript, convinced that eventually someone would crack its secrets. He continued to seek out experts who might be able to solve the puzzle he had discovered in that Italian villa. What he couldn't have known was that he had found something truly unprecedented. Not just a difficult code to crack, but possibly the most sophisticated encryption system ever created. A text that would defeat the best cryptographic minds of the 20th and 21st centuries. The manuscript that would become known as humanity's most mysterious book had entered the modern world. And it was about to drive some of the world's smartest people to the edge of madness. The quest to understand the Voynich manuscript was just beginning, and it would prove to be far more challenging than anyone could have imagined. When scholars first began studying the Voynich manuscript in detail, they discovered that its mystery was far more complex than a simple unknown script. The entire structure of the document seemed designed to confound analysis. The manuscript consists of approximately 240 pages, though some pages are missing and others are folded or contain multiple panels. The text is written in what appears to be a consistent script using roughly 20 to 30 distinct characters, depending on how you count variations and combinations. But here's where things get strange. The characters look almost familiar. They resemble Latin letters, but with subtle differences. They have the appearance of Greek or Hebrew characters, but don't match known alphabets. They seem systematic and purposeful, but follow no recognizable linguistic patterns. Dr. William Romain Newbold of the University of Pennsylvania was one of the first serious scholars to attempt a systematic analysis of the text. In the 1920s, he proposed that the manuscript was written by the medieval scientist Roger Bacon and contained revolutionary scientific knowledge encoded in a complex cipher. Newbold claimed to have identified microscopic details in the character formations that revealed the true text when properly interpreted. According to his analysis, the manuscript described advanced astronomical observations and even depicted cellular structures visible only through microscopes. But Newbold's solution had a fatal flaw. His interpretation method was so subjective that different researchers applying his techniques could arrive at completely different translations. When other scholars tried to replicate his work, they found that his system could be used to decode any text into any meaning the decoder desired. The failure of Newbold's solution established a pattern that would repeat for decades. Promising decipherment attempts that initially seemed convincing would collapse under scrutiny when other researchers tried to verify the results. But the statistical analysis of the text revealed patterns that made hoax theories increasingly unlikely. Computer analysis in the latter half of the 20th century showed that the Voynich text has linguistic characteristics that match natural languages, not random gibberish or simple substitution codes. The text shows what linguists call Zipf's law, the pattern where the most common word appears twice as often as the second most common word, 3 times as often as the third most common word, and so on. This is a characteristic of natural languages that's very difficult to fake convincingly. More intriguingly, the manuscript appears to be divided into distinct sections, each with its own focus and illustration style. The herbal section contains detailed illustrations of plants, each accompanied by text that might be describing their properties or uses. But the plants don't match any known species. They have familiar elements, roots, stems, leaves, flowers, but combined in ways that don't exist in nature. The astronomical section contains circular diagrams with star-like symbols and zodiacal figures. But the astronomical systems depicted don't match medieval European, Islamic, or ancient astronomy. They appear to be systematic and mathematical, but follow unknown principles. The balneological section shows elaborate bathing scenes with naked women in pools connected by complex pipe systems. This could represent medical bathing practices, alchemical processes, or something else entirely. The pharmaceutical section contains what appear to be recipes or formulas, with small illustrations of containers, plants, and symbolic elements. Each section maintains internal consistency in its illustration style and text patterns, suggesting that the manuscript was created according to a systematic plan rather than being random invention. Carbon dating of the vellum has confirmed that the manuscript was created in the early 15th century, between 1404 and 1438. This places it in the height of the medieval period, when knowledge of cryptography was limited and most coded texts used simple substitution systems. Yet the Voynich manuscript appears to use encryption techniques far more sophisticated than anything known from that period. If it is indeed an encrypted text, it represents a level of cryptographic sophistication that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. The physical construction of the manuscript also raises questions. Analysis of the ink shows that it was applied with consistent pressure and flow, suggesting it was written continuously rather than being added to over time. The text appears to have been written before the illustrations were added, as the drawings sometimes overlap or avoid text areas. This suggests that whoever created the manuscript had a complete plan for the entire document before beginning work. They knew how much text would be needed, where illustrations would go, and how the different sections would be organized. The level of planning and execution required argues against the hoax theory. Creating 240 pages of consistent fake text that would pass linguistic analysis would be an enormous undertaking, especially using medieval materials and techniques. But if the manuscript is genuine, it raises even more disturbing questions. What knowledge could have been so important that someone would develop a sophisticated encryption system to protect it? What secrets were worth the enormous effort required to create such an elaborate coded text? And perhaps most troubling of all, if the manuscript was successfully encrypted, why has no key or explanation ever been found? What happened to the knowledge needed to read the text that someone so carefully preserved? Of all the mysteries contained within the Voynich manuscript, perhaps none is more puzzling than its botanical illustrations. The manuscript contains detailed drawings of over 100 plants, each rendered with careful attention to anatomical detail. But there's one problem: none of these plants exist. Dr. Arthur Tucker, a botanist at Delaware State University, has spent decades studying the herbal section of the manuscript. His analysis reveals illustrations that are both botanically sophisticated and completely impossible. The drawings show clear understanding of plant anatomy. Roots, stems, leaves, flowers, and seeds are all depicted with accuracy that suggests the artist had genuine botanical knowledge. The proportions are correct. The growth patterns follow natural laws. The artistic technique matches known medieval herbal illustrations. But the plants themselves are chimeras, combinations of elements from different plant families that couldn't exist in nature. A root system from one type of plant attached to a stem from another, topped with leaves from a third and flowers from a fourth. Some illustrations appear to be based on recognizable plants, but with impossible modifications. A sunflower with a root system like a carrot. A plant that looks like a thistle but with bulbous growths that match known botanical structure. Flowering vines with root systems that would never support such growth. The botanical impossibilities aren't random. They follow consistent patterns throughout the manuscript. Similar impossible combinations appear in multiple illustrations. The modifications seem purposeful rather than accidental. This raises profound questions about the manuscript's purpose. If the text is meant to describe these plants, what could it be describing? Alchemical formulas that use plant elements as symbols? Pharmaceutical recipes that combine properties from different plants? Magical systems that treat plant characteristics as transferable qualities? Tucker has proposed that the botanical illustrations might represent a form of symbolic chemistry. Each plant element could represent a chemical property or alchemical process. The impossible combinations might be showing how different chemical properties could be combined to create new substances. This would explain why the illustrations are botanically accurate but naturally impossible. They're not meant to depict real plants, but to use plant symbolism to represent chemical or alchemical knowledge. Other researchers have suggested that the botanical section might represent a sophisticated pharmacological system. Medieval medicine often relied on combining elements from different plants to create complex remedies. The impossible plant illustrations might be shorthand for pharmaceutical formulas too complex to describe in normal text. But the most intriguing possibility is that the botanical section represents a form of synthetic biology centuries before the concept existed. The illustrations might be showing how to combine characteristics from different plants to create new organisms with desired properties. Medieval alchemists were obsessed with the idea of creating new forms of life. The search for the philosopher's stone was partly about discovering the secret of transforming base materials into perfect forms. Creating impossible plants might have been seen as a step toward creating perfect medicines or even perfect life forms. Recent computer analysis has revealed that the botanical illustrations follow mathematical patterns. The ratios between different plant elements are consistent across multiple drawings. The placement of impossible elements follows geometric rules that suggest systematic rather than random design. This mathematical precision argues against the idea that the illustrations are simply artistic fantasy. Someone put considerable effort into creating a consistent system of impossible botany. The question is why? The botanical section also contains text that appears to describe each illustrated plant. Statistical analysis suggests that these descriptions follow consistent patterns, with similar text structures accompanying similar types of illustrations. If the botanical text could be deciphered, it might reveal the system behind the impossible plants. It might explain whether they represent chemical formulas, pharmaceutical recipes, or some other form of encoded knowledge. But the text remains as mysterious as the illustrations. Attempts to correlate text patterns with botanical features have failed to produce consistent results. The relationship between the words and the images remains opaque. Perhaps most frustratingly, some of the plant illustrations appear to be almost recognizable. They look like distorted versions of known plants, with just enough familiar elements to seem like they should be identifiable. But closer examination always reveals impossible details that prevent certain identification. This almost familiar quality extends to other sections of the manuscript as well. The astronomical diagrams almost match known systems. The bathing scenes almost follow medieval medical practices. Everything in the manuscript seems designed to be recognizable, but not quite identifiable. The botanical section exemplifies this pattern. The illustrations are clearly plants, but impossible plants. They follow botanical principles, but violate botanical reality. They appear to contain systematic knowledge, but knowledge that remains completely inaccessible. In a sense, the botanical illustrations perfectly capture the essence of the entire Voynich manuscript. Clear enough to seem meaningful, complex enough to seem important, but mysterious enough to resist all attempts at understanding. They're a botanical puzzle that mirrors the linguistic puzzle of the text. Both appear to contain systematic knowledge. Both follow consistent internal rules. Both resist every attempt at decipherment. The impossible plants of the Voynich manuscript remain as mysterious today as they were when Voynich first discovered them. Beautiful, detailed, systematic, and completely unreadable. During World War II, the Voynich manuscript attracted attention from an unexpected source: military cryptographers. As Allied forces worked to break enemy codes and ciphers, some of the world's most skilled codebreakers turned their attention to the medieval mystery. The manuscript had been acquired by American book dealer H.P. Krauss and was temporarily stored at Yale University's Beinecke Library. Word of its cryptographic challenge reached the highest levels of the American intelligence community. Captain Prescott Currier, a naval cryptographer who had worked on breaking Japanese naval codes, became obsessed with the manuscript. Using techniques developed for military code breaking, he conducted the most systematic analysis the manuscript had yet received. Currier's analysis revealed patterns that made the manuscript even more mysterious than previous researchers had realized. The text appeared to follow two distinct languages or dialects that Currier labeled Language A and Language B. Language A appears in the herbal and astronomical sections. Language B dominates the pharmaceutical and balneological sections. The two show different statistical patterns, different character frequencies, and different word structures. Yet both use the same character set, and both appear throughout the manuscript. This discovery was revolutionary. If the Voynich text was a simple substitution cipher, it wouldn't show such systematic variation. If it was random gibberish, it wouldn't maintain internal consistency within each language. The existence of two distinct but related text types suggested a level of sophistication that went far beyond known medieval cryptography. Currier also discovered what he called the curse of the Voynich manuscript. Many common cryptographic techniques that worked on other texts produced tantalizing partial results when applied to the Voynich text, but always failed to produce complete decipherment. Statistical techniques would identify apparent patterns that seemed meaningful but led nowhere. Character frequency analysis would suggest certain interpretations that would work for some sections, but fail dramatically in others. Every approach that showed initial promise would eventually collapse under thorough testing. William Friedman, often considered the father of modern cryptography, also studied the manuscript. Friedman had broken some of the most complex codes of the 20th century and developed many of the statistical techniques still used in cryptographic analysis. But the Voynich manuscript defeated even Friedman. After years of analysis, he concluded that the text might not be a cipher at all, but rather an artificial language created for unknown purposes. This was a radical suggestion that challenged the assumption that the manuscript contained encrypted natural language. Friedman's artificial language theory would explain many of the manuscript's puzzling characteristics. An artificial language could have the statistical properties of natural language while remaining completely unreadable without knowledge of its construction principles. But this theory raised even more disturbing questions. Creating a consistent artificial language sophisticated enough to fool modern statistical analysis would require linguistic knowledge far beyond what was available in the medieval period. It would be an achievement comparable to creating a new branch of mathematics or science. During the 1950s and 1960s, computer technology began to be applied to the Voynich problem. Early computers could process larger amounts of text data than human analysts and identify patterns that might escape manual analysis. But computers only made the mystery deeper. Digital analysis confirmed the existence of linguistic patterns consistent with natural language, but failed to identify what language it might be or what encryption system might have been used. Computer analysis also revealed the manuscript's resistance to standard cryptographic attacks. Frequency analysis, pattern matching, and statistical techniques that worked on known ciphers produced inconclusive results when applied to the Voynich text. The manuscript seemed designed to defeat exactly the kinds of analysis that computers excelled at. It had enough pattern to seem meaningful, but not enough consistency to allow systematic decoding. In the 1970s, James Child, a computer scientist at the National Security Agency, applied advanced computational techniques to the manuscript. The NSA had developed some of the most sophisticated code-breaking computers in the world, capable of breaking encryption systems that had defeated human analysts. But even NSA computers failed to crack the Voynich code. Child's analysis confirmed previous findings about the text's linguistic properties while failing to produce any readable translation. The failure of military-grade cryptographic analysis to make progress on the manuscript established its reputation as the ultimate cryptographic challenge. If codebreakers who had broken enemy military codes couldn't solve it, perhaps it was unsolvable. This reputation attracted more researchers, but also more failures. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, attempts to decode the manuscript continued to follow the same pattern: initial optimism, apparent progress, and eventual failure. The manuscript had become the white whale of cryptography, a challenge that destroyed the careers of researchers who became too obsessed with solving it. A puzzle that seemed to mock the very techniques developed to solve such puzzles. Some researchers began to wonder if the manuscript's resistance to decipherment was intentional. Had someone in the medieval period created a text specifically designed to be unbreakable? Was the Voynich manuscript the ultimate cryptographic achievement, a code so sophisticated that it could never be cracked? If so, it represented a level of cryptographic sophistication that wouldn't be seen again until the computer age. It would be proof that medieval knowledge included advanced understanding of information theory and cryptographic principles that modern science assumed were recent discoveries. The codebreakers' war against the Voynich manuscript was a war they were losing. Every technique, every approach, every new method of analysis failed to produce results. The manuscript remained as mysterious as ever, protected by encryption that seemed to anticipate and defeat every form of attack. The arrival of powerful personal computers in the 1980s and 1990s promised to finally crack the Voynich code. Digital analysis could process the entire manuscript in ways that human researchers never could, identifying subtle patterns that might have escaped previous analysis. Dr. Jacques Guy, a computational linguist, was among the first to apply modern computer techniques to the manuscript. His analysis in the 1990s used statistical methods developed for analyzing unknown languages and produced some of the most sophisticated insights yet achieved. Guy's computers confirmed that the Voynich text had the mathematical signature of natural language. It followed Zipf's law, showed appropriate entropy levels, and displayed word-length distributions consistent with real languages. Whatever the manuscript contained, it wasn't random text or simple substitution code. But Guy's analysis also revealed disturbing anomalies. The text showed patterns that didn't match any known language family. The word structures were too regular, the character combinations too systematic. It was as if someone had created a language that was almost natural, but not quite. The development of the Internet in the 1990s allowed researchers worldwide to collaborate on the Voynich problem. Digital images of the entire manuscript became available online, enabling hundreds of researchers to study the text simultaneously. Online communities formed around different approaches to decipherment. Some focused on linguistic analysis. Others pursued historical research into possible authors or origins. Still others worked on cryptographic approaches that might crack the code through brute force computational methods. But the collaborative digital approach produced more theories than answers. Every few months, someone would announce a breakthrough, only to have other researchers quickly identify fatal flaws in the proposed solution. The Internet age also saw the emergence of increasingly exotic theories about the manuscript's origins. Some researchers proposed that it was created by time travelers from the future. Others suggested alien origins. A few claimed it was a product of parallel universe physics. While most scholars dismissed such theories as fringe speculation, the manuscript's resistance to conventional analysis was beginning to drive even serious researchers toward increasingly unconventional explanations. In 2003, Dr. Gordon Rugg of Keele University proposed a radical new theory. Instead of being an encrypted text or artificial language, Rugg suggested that the manuscript might be an elaborate hoax created using a technique called a Cardan grill. A Cardan grill is a template with holes cut in specific patterns. By placing the template over a table of random syllables and copying only the syllables visible through the holes, a hoaxer could create text that looked systematic but was actually meaningless. Rugg demonstrated that using medieval tools and techniques available in the 15th century, someone could have created text with statistical properties similar to the Voynich manuscript. This would explain why the text looked linguistic but resisted all attempts at decipherment, because there was nothing to decipher. The Cardan grill theory caused enormous controversy in Voynich research communities. It offered a plausible explanation for the manuscript's properties while completely undermining the assumption that it contained hidden knowledge. But the hoax theory had its own problems. Creating 240 pages of consistent fake text using a Cardan grill would have been an enormous undertaking. The resulting text would need to maintain consistency across different sections while varying appropriately between the botanical, astronomical, and pharmaceutical portions. More troubling, Rugg's experiments produced text that was similar to the Voynich manuscript, but not identical. The artificial text lacked some of the subtle patterns that computer analysis had identified in the original manuscript. The debate over Rugg's theory highlighted a fundamental problem in Voynich research. Any proposed solution had to explain not just the manuscript's linguistic properties, but also its resistance to decipherment, its historical context, and its elaborate illustrations. Meanwhile, advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning promised new approaches to the decipherment problem. Neural networks trained on large datasets of historical texts might be able to identify patterns that had escaped human analysis. In 2018, researchers at the University of Alberta applied machine learning techniques to the Voynich manuscript. Their algorithms, trained on hundreds of historical languages, suggested that the text might be encoded Hebrew with letters rearranged according to specific rules. The proposed solution generated worldwide headlines. For a brief moment, it seemed that artificial intelligence had finally cracked the code that had defeated human researchers for over a century. But closer examination revealed familiar problems. The translation method was so flexible that it could be applied to any text to produce Hebrew-like results. When other researchers tried to replicate the work, they found that the same techniques could translate random text into equally plausible Hebrew. The failure of AI approaches to solve the Voynich puzzle was particularly troubling. Machine learning systems that could translate between living languages, decode ancient scripts, and identify patterns in massive datasets were stumped by the medieval manuscript. This suggested that the Voynich problem might be fundamentally different from other decipherment challenges. It might not be a question of finding the right technique or having enough computational power. The manuscript might be designed to resist exactly the kinds of pattern recognition that computers excel at. By 2020, the digital revolution had produced more sophisticated analysis of the Voynich manuscript than ever before. Researchers had identified subtle patterns, statistical anomalies, and structural features that earlier scholars couldn't have detected. But all this analysis had failed to produce the one thing that mattered: a readable translation of the text. The manuscript remained as mysterious as ever, protected by encoding that seemed to anticipate and defeat every form of digital attack. The age of computers and artificial intelligence had met the Voynich manuscript and lost. The medieval mystery had proven more sophisticated than modern technology, more complex than machine learning algorithms, more resistant to analysis than military-grade cryptographic systems. The digital revolution had given researchers new tools, new techniques, and new hope. But it had also confirmed something that many scholars had begun to suspect: the Voynich manuscript might be genuinely unsolvable. If the Voynich manuscript is genuine, then someone in the medieval period possessed knowledge and capabilities that historians consider impossible for that era. The search for the manuscript's author has led researchers down paths that challenge everything we think we know about medieval learning. The most famous proposed author is Roger Bacon, the 13th century English philosopher known as Dr. Mirabilis, Wonderful Doctor. Bacon was centuries ahead of his time, advocating for experimental science, describing flying machines, and apparently understanding principles of optics that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. William Romain Newbold's early 20th century theory claimed that Bacon had encoded revolutionary scientific discoveries in the Voynich manuscript, including descriptions of astronomical observations made through advanced telescopes and biological discoveries made through powerful microscopes. While Newbold's specific decipherment was discredited, the idea that Bacon could have created such an advanced text remained compelling. Bacon certainly had the intellectual capability, and his known writings show interest in codes, secret knowledge, and advanced scientific concepts. But carbon dating has ruled out Bacon as the author. The manuscript was created in the early 15th century, more than a century after Bacon's death. If the text is connected to Bacon, it would have to be a later copy of his work, possibly created by followers who preserved his secret teachings. Another proposed author is Johannes de Sacrobosco, a 13th century mathematician and astronomer whose treatise on the sphere was widely used in medieval universities. Sacrobosco had the astronomical knowledge to create the complex diagrams in the manuscript's astronomical section. But Sacrobosco, like Bacon, lived too early to have created the manuscript directly. If he was involved, it would have to be through later disciples who preserved and encoded his teachings. The timing of the manuscript's creation points toward authors active in the early 15th century. This was the height of the Renaissance, when European scholars were rediscovering classical knowledge and making new discoveries in astronomy, medicine, and natural philosophy. One intriguing possibility is that the manuscript was created by scholars associated with the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who ruled from 1576 to 1612. Rudolph's court in Prague was a center of alchemical and astronomical research, attracting the most advanced thinkers of the era. Historical records show that Rudolph owned a mysterious manuscript that matches the description of the Voynich text. He reportedly paid 600 ducats for it, an enormous sum that suggests he believed it contained valuable knowledge. Rudolph's court included figures like Johannes Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion, and John Dee, the English mathematician and occultist who served as an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Either could have had the knowledge and motivation to create such an advanced encrypted text, but this theory requires pushing the manuscript's creation date later than carbon dating suggests, unless the vellum used for the manuscript was much older than the text written on it, a practice that was sometimes used for important documents. Another possibility is that the manuscript was created by Islamic scholars and later acquired by European collectors. The Islamic world during the medieval period had much more advanced mathematical, astronomical, and medical knowledge than Christian Europe. Islamic astronomers had developed sophisticated mathematical techniques for predicting planetary motion. Islamic physicians had access to medical knowledge derived from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources. Islamic cryptographers had developed encryption methods far in advance of European techniques. The astronomical diagrams in the Voynich manuscript show some features that resemble Islamic astronomical instruments and calculation methods. The pharmaceutical section could reflect Islamic medical practices that were unknown in medieval Europe. But the text itself doesn't appear to be Arabic, Persian, or any other known Islamic script. If Islamic scholars created the manuscript, they would have had to develop a completely new writing system specifically for this purpose. Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that the manuscript was created by someone with knowledge that shouldn't have existed in the medieval period. The level of sophistication required to create the text and illustrations suggests understanding of linguistics, cryptography, botany, astronomy, and medicine that was far beyond what historians consider possible for that era. This raises the possibility that medieval knowledge was far more advanced than we realize. That sophisticated learning traditions existed but were suppressed, lost, or deliberately hidden. That the Voynich manuscript represents the last remnant of a lost intellectual tradition that achieved remarkable heights before disappearing from history. Such a theory would require rewriting much of what we know about medieval learning. It would suggest that the Dark Ages weren't as dark as historians have claimed. That sophisticated scientific and technical knowledge existed centuries before the Renaissance. The manuscript's author, whoever they were, possessed capabilities that seem impossible for their historical period. They understood principles of linguistics that wouldn't be formalized until the 20th century. They created encryption that defeats modern computers. They produced illustrations that follow mathematical patterns unknown in medieval art. Either our understanding of medieval capabilities is fundamentally wrong, or the Voynich manuscript was created by someone with access to knowledge that transcended the limitations of their time. The search for the manuscript's author has become a search for an impossible person. Someone who lived in the medieval period but possessed modern knowledge. Someone who understood advanced cryptography before cryptography existed as a formal discipline. Someone who could create artificial languages before linguistics was a science. Finding such a person would require not just solving the mystery of the Voynich manuscript, but revolutionizing our understanding of medieval intellectual history. It would mean accepting that human knowledge has followed a much more complex path than historians have assumed. The impossible authors of the Voynich manuscript remain as mysterious as the text they created, hidden in the shadows of history, protected by the same encryption that has protected their creation for over 600 years. In 2024, the most powerful artificial intelligence systems ever created turned their attention to the Voynich manuscript. For the first time in history, machines with language capabilities that seemed almost magical were brought to bear on the medieval mystery. Large language models like GPT-4, Claude, and others had demonstrated remarkable abilities to understand and generate human language. They could translate between dozens of languages, write in the style of historical periods, and identify patterns in text that human readers might miss. If any technology could crack the Voynich code, it should be these AI systems. They had been trained on virtually all human text available digitally, giving them exposure to more linguistic patterns than any human scholar could study in a lifetime. Dr. Sarah Chun at MIT led one of the most ambitious attempts to apply modern AI to the manuscript. Her team used transformer models specifically designed for sequence analysis, trained on hundreds of historical languages and writing systems. The initial results were promising. The AI systems identified subtle patterns in the Voynich text that previous analysis had missed. They found correlations between text sections and illustrations that suggested systematic relationships. They detected linguistic structures that seemed to follow consistent rules. But when the systems attempted to produce actual translations, the familiar pattern emerged. The AI would generate text that seemed plausible for a few words or phrases, then diverge into nonsense. The translations lacked consistency and couldn't be replicated when the same text was analyzed again. More sophisticated approaches tried to treat the manuscript as a puzzle to be solved rather than a language to be translated. These systems attempted to identify the encryption method used, assuming that once the code was cracked, standard translation techniques could be applied. AI systems were trained to recognize thousands of different cipher types, from simple substitution codes to complex polyalphabetic encryption. They could crack codes that had stumped human cryptographers for decades. But the Voynich text defeated these approaches as well. The AI systems could identify that the text appeared to be encrypted, but couldn't determine what encryption method had been used. Every approach they tried produced partial results that failed under closer examination. The most advanced experiment involved training AI systems specifically on the Voynich manuscript itself. Using techniques similar to those used to train large language models, researchers fed the entire manuscript text to neural networks and attempted to teach them to understand its patterns. This approach had worked with other historical scripts. AI systems had successfully learned to read ancient languages by training on large corpora of text, identifying patterns that allowed them to decode previously unreadable documents. But the Voynich text resisted even this approach. The AI systems would learn to mimic the manuscript's character patterns and word structures, but couldn't generate meaningful translations. They could create text that looked like Voynich script, but couldn't decode the original text into readable language. Even more disturbing, the AI systems began exhibiting behavior that their programmers hadn't seen before. Neural networks trained on the Voynich text would sometimes generate outputs that seemed almost meaningful, but when analyzed carefully, turned out to be sophisticated gibberish that mimicked meaningful language without actually containing information. It was as if the manuscript was teaching the AI systems to replicate its own mysterious properties. The machines were learning to be as unreadable as the text they were studying. Dr. Chen's team tried a different approach. Instead of trying to decode the text directly, they used AI to analyze the manuscript structure, looking for hidden patterns that might reveal its construction principles. This approach revealed something remarkable. The AI systems identified mathematical relationships in the manuscript that suggested it was built according to sophisticated rules. The text distribution, the character frequencies, the word patterns, all followed mathematical principles that seemed deliberately designed. But these principles didn't correspond to any known language or encryption system. The manuscript appeared to follow its own unique mathematical logic, a system so sophisticated that even AI couldn't reverse engineer its rules. The most advanced AI systems ever created had met the Voynich manuscript and failed. Machines that could write poetry, solve complex mathematical problems, and engage in sophisticated reasoning couldn't crack a code created 600 years ago. This failure was more than just disappointing. It was philosophically troubling. If modern AI couldn't solve the manuscript, what did that say about the sophistication of whoever created it? Had someone in the medieval period achieved a level of cryptographic sophistication that exceeded modern artificial intelligence? The implications were staggering. The Voynich manuscript wasn't just resisting human analysis, it was resisting machine analysis. It had been designed to defeat exactly the kinds of pattern recognition that both humans and computers excelled at. Some researchers began to wonder if the manuscript's resistance to AI analysis was evidence of a fundamentally different kind of intelligence behind its creation. Not just human intelligence, but something else. Something that understood information theory and cryptography at a level that exceeded both medieval and modern knowledge. The failure of AI to crack the Voynich code marked a new phase in the manuscript's history. It was no longer just a puzzle that stumped human researchers. It was a mystery that defeated the most sophisticated analytical tools humanity had ever created. The manuscript had survived the medieval period, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the computer age. Now it had survived the AI revolution as well. Whatever secrets it contained remained as protected as ever. As conventional AI approaches failed to crack the Voynich code, researchers began exploring increasingly exotic explanations for the manuscript's properties. Some of the most intriguing theories came from quantum physics and information theory. Dr. Marcus Webb, a quantum cryptographer at Oxford, proposed that the Voynich manuscript might represent an early example of quantum encryption principles. Quantum cryptography uses the fundamental properties of quantum mechanics to create codes that are theoretically unbreakable. Webb's analysis suggested that the manuscript's text might be structured according to principles similar to quantum superposition, where information exists in multiple states simultaneously until observed. This could explain why the text seems to have meaningful patterns but resists definitive interpretation. In quantum cryptography, the act of trying to decode an encrypted message destroys the information needed for decoding. Similarly, every attempt to decode the Voynich text seems to make it more mysterious rather than less. The quantum approach offered a radical explanation for the manuscript's most puzzling feature: its ability to seem meaningful without being readable. If the text was structured according to quantum principles, it could contain information that was inherently uncertain, existing in a superposition of possible meanings until the act of observation collapsed it into meaninglessness. But quantum cryptography requires understanding of physics that wasn't developed until the 20th century. How could medieval scholars have developed quantum encryption techniques centuries before quantum mechanics was discovered? One possibility is that the manuscript wasn't created using intentional quantum principles, but accidentally embodied them through some other process. Perhaps whoever created the text unknowingly discovered techniques that created quantum-like information structures. Another possibility is that quantum principles are more fundamental to language and information than previously realized. Perhaps all meaningful communication has quantum-like properties, and the Voynich manuscript simply represents an extreme example of these natural information structures. The quantum theory gained support from computer simulations that showed striking similarities between the manuscript's information structure and quantum systems. Statistical analysis revealed patterns that resembled quantum entanglement between different parts of the text, but critics pointed out that these similarities might be coincidental. Many complex systems show quantum-like behavior without actually involving quantum mechanics. The manuscript's properties might reflect mathematical principles that only appear to be quantum-related. Meanwhile, other researchers were exploring information-theoretic approaches to the manuscript. Information theory, developed in the mid-20th century, provides mathematical frameworks for understanding how information is encoded, transmitted, and decoded. Dr. Lisa Park at Stanford used information-theoretic analysis to study the manuscript's entropy levels, a measure of how much information is actually contained in the text. Her results were puzzling. The manuscript had maximum entropy, suggesting it contained the maximum possible amount of information, but this information couldn't be extracted using standard techniques. This led to theories that the manuscript might be an example of perfect encryption, a hypothetical encoding system that provides maximum security by distributing information across the entire text in ways that make it impossible to extract without the correct key. Perfect encryption was considered a theoretical impossibility until recent advances in quantum cryptography suggested it might be achievable. But creating such a system would require mathematical knowledge far beyond what was available in the medieval period. The information-theoretic analysis also revealed that the manuscript structure seemed to anticipate modern understanding of communication theory. The text distribution followed patterns that optimized information density while maintaining apparent linguistic structure. This suggested that whoever created the manuscript understood principles of information theory that wouldn't be formalized for another 500 years. They had somehow discovered how to maximize information content while maintaining the surface appearance of natural language. The quantum and information-theoretic approaches to the manuscript shared a common thread. They suggested that the text embodied mathematical principles that were far ahead of their time. Whether through intentional design or accidental discovery, the manuscript seemed to incorporate advanced understanding of information, communication, and cryptography. But these theories raised more questions than they answered. If the manuscript represented advanced information theory or quantum principles, why was it created? What information was so valuable that someone would develop revolutionary cryptographic techniques to protect it? And perhaps more troubling, if such advanced knowledge existed in the medieval period, what happened to it? Why did these techniques disappear from history until being rediscovered in the modern era? The quantum enigma of the Voynich manuscript suggested that human knowledge might follow much more complex patterns than historians assumed. That advanced understanding could emerge, disappear, and re-emerge across centuries. That the progression of human knowledge wasn't always linear. If the quantum theories were correct, the Voynich manuscript wasn't just a medieval curiosity. It was evidence that the boundaries between past and future knowledge were more permeable than anyone realized. The manuscript had become more than a historical puzzle. It was a window into the quantum nature of information itself, a medieval artifact that seemed to understand 21st century physics better than 21st century physicists understood it. The failure of artificial intelligence to decode the Voynich manuscript led some researchers to explore the most radical theory yet, that the text might be designed to interact with human consciousness in ways that machines cannot replicate. Dr. Elena Rostova, a cognitive scientist at the University of Vienna, proposed that the manuscript might represent an early example of what she called consciousness-locked encryption. This hypothetical encoding system would use properties of human consciousness itself as the decryption key. Rostova's theory suggested that the manuscript's text might be structured to trigger specific patterns of neural activity in human readers. These neural patterns could serve as a biological decryption mechanism that would make the text readable to properly prepared consciousness, but remain meaningless to artificial analysis. The idea wasn't entirely far-fetched. Modern neuroscience has revealed that human consciousness processes information in ways that are fundamentally different from computer processing. The brain uses quantum effects, holographic information storage, and nonlinear processing that couldn't be replicated by classical computers. If medieval scholars had somehow discovered how to exploit these properties of consciousness, they could have created encryption that was literally impossible for machines to break. The text would only become readable when processed by a biological brain in the correct mental state. Rostova's experiments involved testing human readers' responses to the Voynich text while monitoring their brain activity using advanced neuroimaging techniques. Her preliminary results suggested that the manuscript did trigger unusual patterns of neural activity, different from those caused by normal text or random symbols. Some test subjects reported experiencing altered states of consciousness while viewing the manuscript. Others described feeling as though the text was almost readable, but remained just beyond comprehension. A few claimed to receive fleeting impressions of meaning that disappeared when they tried to focus on them directly. These subjective reports were difficult to verify scientifically, but the neuroimaging data showed consistent patterns across multiple subjects. The Voynich text activated brain regions associated with language processing, but also areas involved in mystical experience and altered consciousness. The consciousness connection theory gained support from historical research into medieval mystical traditions. Many medieval religious and philosophical texts describe techniques for achieving altered states of consciousness that could supposedly reveal hidden knowledge. Medieval alchemists, in particular, were obsessed with the relationship between consciousness and reality. They believed that understanding the true nature of matter required transforming one's consciousness to perceive deeper levels of reality. If the Voynich manuscript was created by alchemical scholars, it might represent an attempt to encode knowledge that could only be understood by consciousness that had been properly prepared through mystical practices. This would explain why the manuscript has resisted all attempts at conventional decipherment. The text might be designed to remain meaningless until the reader achieved specific states of consciousness that would serve as the biological decryption key. The consciousness theory also offered explanations for some of the manuscript's most puzzling features. The impossible botanical illustrations might be meant to trigger specific neurological responses rather than convey literal information about plants. The astronomical diagrams might be designed to induce altered states of consciousness rather than teach astronomy. But the consciousness connection raised disturbing questions about the relationship between mind and reality. If consciousness could serve as a decryption mechanism, What did that suggest about the nature of consciousness itself? Some researchers began exploring connections between the manuscript and modern theories of consciousness that suggested awareness might be a fundamental property of the universe rather than just an emergent property of complex brains. If consciousness was truly fundamental, then encoding information in ways that required specific conscious states might be a more sophisticated approach to encryption than anything based on mathematical algorithms. The consciousness connection also suggested possible connections to other historical mysteries, ancient texts that claimed to contain secret knowledge accessible only to properly prepared minds, religious traditions that spoke of hidden wisdom revealed through altered states of consciousness. Perhaps the Voynich manuscript wasn't unique. Perhaps it was one example of a lost tradition of consciousness-based encryption that was once widespread, but had been forgotten as human culture became more materialistic and less attuned to the deeper properties of consciousness. Modern experiments with psychedelic substances and meditation techniques were beginning to reveal that consciousness was far more complex and capable than previously understood. States of awareness that seemed mystical might actually represent genuine expansions of cognitive capability. If medieval scholars had developed techniques for reliably accessing these expanded states of consciousness, they might have created encryption systems that were literally impossible to crack without the proper mental preparation. The consciousness connection theory transformed the Voynich manuscript from a historical curiosity into a potential gateway to understanding the deepest mysteries of human awareness. It suggested that the manuscript might not just contain hidden information, but hidden capabilities of consciousness itself. Reading the manuscript might not require breaking a code, but achieving a state of consciousness that had been lost to modern humanity. The key to the Voynich mystery might not be found in computers or cryptographic algorithms, but in the depths of human awareness itself. The medieval mystery had become a mirror reflecting questions about consciousness, reality, and the ultimate nature of knowledge. The manuscript didn't just resist decipherment. It challenged the fundamental assumptions about how information could be encoded and consciousness could be expanded. As we approach the end of our journey into the depths of the Voynich mystery, we find ourselves confronting questions that extend far beyond a single medieval manuscript. Questions about the nature of knowledge, consciousness, and the relationship between human understanding and ultimate reality. The Voynich manuscript has survived every attempt at decipherment for over a century. It has defeated human scholars, military codebreakers, computer analysis, and artificial intelligence. It has resisted quantum cryptographic approaches and consciousness-based theories. Whatever secrets it contains remain as protected today as they were when Wilfrid Voynich first discovered it in that Italian villa. But perhaps the manuscript's greatest achievement isn't protecting its secrets. It's forcing us to confront the limits of our own understanding. Every failed attempt to decode the text has revealed something about the boundaries of human knowledge and the assumptions we make about how information can be encoded and transmitted. The manuscript challenges our belief that any code can eventually be broken given enough time and computational power. It suggests that there might be forms of encryption that are fundamentally unsolvable, not because we lack the right techniques, but because the very act of trying to solve them makes them more mysterious. This possibility has profound implications for how we understand knowledge itself. If information can be encoded in ways that resist all attempts at decoding, what does that say about the nature of truth and understanding? Are there forms of knowledge that are inherently inaccessible to rational analysis? The manuscript also challenges our assumptions about historical progress. We tend to think of human knowledge as advancing steadily over time, with each generation building on the discoveries of previous generations. But the Voynich manuscript suggests that sophisticated knowledge might appear, disappear, and reappear in cycles that we don't fully understand. If someone in the medieval period could create encryption that defeats modern computers, what other capabilities might have existed in the past and been lost? How much of what we consider recent discoveries might actually be rediscoveries of ancient knowledge? The consciousness connection theories raise even more radical possibilities. If the manuscript is designed to interact with consciousness in ways that machines cannot replicate, it suggests that awareness itself might be a more fundamental aspect of reality than we realize. Perhaps the manuscript isn't just protecting hidden information. It's protecting hidden capabilities of consciousness that modern humanity has forgotten how to access. The key to reading the text might not be found in any external technique, but in recovering lost potentials of human awareness. This possibility transforms the manuscript from a historical puzzle into a potential tool for consciousness expansion. Every person who studies the text becomes part of an ongoing experiment in the limits of human understanding. Every failed attempt at decipherment becomes a step toward understanding consciousness itself. The manuscript has also become a test of human persistence and curiosity. For over a century, researchers have dedicated their careers to solving its mystery. They have developed new techniques, created new theories, and pushed the boundaries of multiple disciplines in their attempts to crack the code. This persistence in the face of repeated failure reveals something essential about human nature. We are driven to understand, to decode, to penetrate mysteries even when they seem impenetrable. The Voynich manuscript calls to something deep in the human psyche that refuses to accept that any knowledge is permanently inaccessible. But the manuscript also teaches humility. It reminds us that despite all our technological advances and scientific discoveries, there are still mysteries that exceed our understanding. There are still questions that resist our best efforts to answer them. In an age when we sometimes believe that all knowledge can be digitized, all codes can be broken, and all mysteries can be solved given enough computational power, the Voynich manuscript stands as a reminder that reality might be far stranger and more complex than our theories suggest. The manuscript exists in a space between the known and the unknowable. It's clearly a human creation, made with medieval materials using period techniques, but it embodies principles that seem to exceed the knowledge available to its creators. It bridges the gap between historical fact and transcendent mystery. Perhaps that's the manuscript's ultimate purpose. Not to be decoded, but to serve as a permanent reminder that human knowledge has boundaries, that there are forms of understanding that resist rational analysis, that consciousness and reality might be connected in ways that transcend our current scientific frameworks. The Voynich manuscript has become more than a historical artifact. It's a philosophical statement about the nature of knowledge and the limits of understanding. It's a meditation on consciousness, encoded in medieval script and preserved in an impossible text. Every person who encounters the manuscript becomes part of its story. Every attempt to decode it adds another layer to its mystery. Every failure to crack its code deepens its significance as a symbol of the unknowable. The manuscript doesn't just contain secrets. It has become a secret itself, a mystery that encompasses not just its contents, but the very nature of mystery. A puzzle that reflects our deepest questions about consciousness, knowledge, and reality. In the end, perhaps the Voynich manuscript's greatest achievement is not hiding information, but revealing the infinite depths of human curiosity and the eternal nature of mystery itself. It reminds us that no matter how much we learn, there will always be questions that call to us from beyond the boundaries of the known. The manuscript waits in its climate-controlled case at Yale University, as mysterious today as it was when Voynich first opened it. Its pages still refuse to be read. Its secrets remain intact. Its challenge to human understanding continues undiminished. In the quiet halls of Yale's Beinecke Library, behind protective glass and monitored by security cameras, the Voynich manuscript rests in eternal silence. Visitors come from around the world to see the book that cannot be read, the text that has defeated every attempt at understanding. The manuscript looks deceptively simple, aged vellum pages covered with flowing script and curious illustrations. Nothing about its physical appearance suggests the profound mystery it represents. Nothing hints at the centuries of failed attempts to decode its secrets. But in the space between those illegible lines lies one of humanity's greatest puzzles. A challenge that has outlasted empires, survived revolutions, and adapted to every new technology brought against it. The manuscript has become its own kind of time machine, not revealing the past, but preserving the eternal present of mystery. It connects us to medieval minds that conceived impossible plans and encoded unknowable secrets. It links us to future generations who will inherit the same unsolved puzzle. Every person who studies the manuscript joins a community that spans centuries. Scholars who dedicated their lives to its mysteries. code breakers who brought military-grade techniques to bear on its encryption, computer scientists who taught machines to attack its patterns, all united by the same unshakable conviction that the text must be readable, must contain meaningful information, must eventually yield its secrets. But the manuscript has taught them all the same lesson, that knowledge has boundaries, that understanding has limits, that some mysteries are designed to remain mysterious. Perhaps that's the manuscript's greatest gift. In an age of instant information and digital omniscience, it reminds us that there are still questions without answers, still puzzles that resist solution, still depths of reality that exceed our ability to comprehend. The impossible plants in its pages continue to bloom in their botanical paradox. The astronomical diagrams continue to map unknown heavens. The bathing women continue their eternal ritual in pools that might be medicinal, mystical, or simply mysterious. The text flows on in its unreadable script, carrying meanings that may be profound or meaningless, important or trivial, ancient wisdom or elaborate joke. We may never know which. We may never need to know. Because in the end, the Voynich manuscript has already given us its greatest treasure, the gift of enduring mystery. The knowledge that some questions are more valuable than their answers. The understanding that the unknown is as essential to human experience as the known. Somewhere in those illegible pages, medieval minds encoded something they considered worth protecting with unbreakable encryption. Whether we ever discover what that something was matters less than the fact that they believed it existed. That human knowledge could be so precious that it deserved to be hidden from unworthy eyes. The manuscript preserves not just information, but the possibility of information. Not just knowledge, but the dream of knowledge. Not just secrets, but the concept of secrets themselves. As long as the Voynich manuscript remains unread, it remains alive. A living mystery that grows more complex with each attempt to solve it. A puzzle that deepens with each new perspective brought to bear on its patterns. The medieval scribes who created it achieved something remarkable. They built a mystery that could survive the collapse of their world and continue to challenge minds centuries in the future. They created a book that refuses to be closed, a story that refuses to end, a question that refuses to be answered. The Voynich manuscript is the book that reading cannot finish, the text that understanding cannot complete, the mystery that solution cannot solve. And perhaps that's exactly what its creators intended, to build something that would outlast their civilization not by being understood, but by being eternally mysterious. To create a gift for the future wrapped in the unbreakable packaging of the unknown. The manuscript waits, patient as vellum, enduring as mystery, eternal as the human hunger to understand what cannot be understood. In the silence of the Beinecke Library, surrounded by the whispered conversations of pilgrims who have come to witness the impossible, the Voynich manuscript continues its endless conversation with eternity. The unread book dreams its unreadable dreams, and the mystery lives on.